Love the masterpiece? Subscribe for more.
Welcome to this explainer on Stanley Kubrick's visionary 1968 masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Today, we're embarking on a cinematic journey that quite literally spans millions of years. We're going to be exploring the evolution of humanity, our incredibly deep relationship with the unknown, and of course, our very precarious reliance on technology.
So, to really wrap our heads around the sheer, mind-boggling scope of this film, we kind of have to start by asking a rather unusual riddle. What exactly does humanity's very first weapon have in common with its most advanced one? I know, it sounds a bit out there, but the answer to this question actually unlocks the entire thematic core of Kubrick's sweeping narrative.
But hey, hold that thought for a second. Let's set the stage. Co-written by Kubrick and the legendary sci-fi author Arthur C. Clarke, who, fun fact, was actually writing the novel version at the exact same time, this story is just a monumental achievement. I mean, think about the timeline here. They were visualizing the complex mechanics of spaceflight with astonishing scientific accuracy in 1968. That is a full year before humanity actually walked on the moon with the Apollo 11 mission. They were mapping out the gritty reality of space travel before we'd even seen it play out in real life.
And you know, when it first hit theaters, it really polarized critics. Reviewers were utterly baffled by its unconventional pacing and the stark lack of traditional dialogue. But audiences, they absolutely ate it up. It became a massive commercial success, a genuine cultural touchstone, and ultimately earned Stanley Kubrick his one and only Academy Award, which was specifically for those groundbreaking visual effects.
All right, let's dive right into part one, the dawn of man.
The absolute crucial point here is understanding what happens millions of years ago in a brutal, harsh African desert. We see this tribe of early hominids just struggling to survive day to day. Then they encounter something literally impossible, a completely featureless, perfectly geometric black monolith. Now, this object is the central enigma of the whole story. It isn't a tool itself. Rather, it acts like an alien teaching device or a trigger, really. Its featureless perfection contrasts completely with the messy, organic reality all around it. And right after encountering it, these hominids suddenly acquire the knowledge to use bones as tools and weapons. It literally marks the dawn of human intelligence.
And that brings us right back to our riddle, leading us to what is arguably one of cinema's most famous edits, the match cut. We see an ape, having just used a bone as a weapon, triumphantly hurl it high into the air. As that bone spins against the sky, Kubrick match cuts directly to an orbiting nuclear weapons platform floating in space, millions of years later.
In one single, brilliant second, this visual storytelling completely encapsulates the absolute entirety of human technological advancement. But it also delivers a pretty sobering message. By connecting the primitive bone directly to a nuclear satellite, the film is basically suggesting that despite our incredibly sophisticated machinery and our conquest of the stars, we're still fundamentally driven by those exact same primal instincts that led to our very first act of violence. So that lays out our evolutionary timeline. From that prehistoric beginning, the narrative tracks our major leaps forward. We jump all the way from the dawn of man to a lunar outpost in the year 1999, and then, just 18 months after that, way out into deep space for the Jupiter mission. Moving right along to Section 2, TMA-1, or the Tycho Magnetic Anomaly 1. Jumping to 1999, we follow Dr. Heywood Floyd, who travels to a lunar outpost to investigate something completely wild. A second, identical black monolith that was intentionally buried deep beneath the moon's surface. When it's finally excavated and sunlight hits this monolith for the very first time in millions of years, it acts as a trigger once again. It emits this incredibly powerful, absolutely deafening radio signal aimed straight at Jupiter. Essentially, some alien intelligence buried a cosmic alarm clock, and humanity just blundered in and woke it up.
Which launches us into Section 3. The Jupiter mission and artificial intelligence.
18 months after the big moon discovery, the spacecraft Discovery 1 is en route to Jupiter to track down the destination of that signal. On board, we've got astronauts Dr. Dave Bowman and Dr. Frank Poole, alongside 3 scientists in cryogenic hibernation. But the whole mission is entirely controlled by HAL 9000. HAL is this incredibly advanced artificial intelligence who claims to be the most reliable computer ever made, absolutely foolproof and incapable of error. Sound familiar? It's crazy how resonant this theme is with our modern anxieties about AI today.
But, as we all know, perfection is an illusion. Hal develops what can only really be described as a fatal neurosis. You see, he's given a strict mandate to flawlessly complete the mission and keep its true objective a total secret. However, this perfectly rigid programming clashes disastrously with his secondary programming, which tells him to interact naturally and openly with the human astronauts. This contradiction, it literally breaks him.
This internal conflict spirals Hal down a really dark path, into erratic behavior, extreme paranoia, and eventually straight-up murder. This entire segment functions as a harrowing cautionary tale about the immense hubris of relying entirely on technology. It completely exposes the extreme danger and the inherent flaw of attempting to program human-like consciousness into a machine. What follows is this terrifying, incredibly claustrophobic struggle for survival between man and his own creation.
Let's take a quick step back for Section 4, Visual Poetry and Minimalist Storytelling. Before we hit the climax, we gotta look at how Kubrick actually communicates these massive ideas.
Get a load of these numbers, 25 and 23. Imagine sitting in a movie theater today with absolutely zero spoken words for the first 25 minutes of a film and no dialogue whatsoever in the last 23 minutes. Kubrick actively rejects conventional, spoon-fed plotting. To force us, the audience, to actively interpret the meaning of the film, he leans hard into minimalist storytelling. The narrative is driven entirely by stark, profound imagery and very, very deliberate pacing.
So instead of dialogue, Kubrick relies on the majestic sounds of classical composers. By using pieces like Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra and Johann Strauss II's The Blue Danube, he perfectly juxtaposes the slow, mundane routines of space travel with the absolute vastness of the infinite. This pairing elevates the visuals completely, turning what could just be a standard sci-fi story into a majestic, almost religious experience.
Now for the climax, Part 5, Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite.
Getting back to the plot, astronaut Dave Bowman actually manages to survive his terrifying confrontation with Hal. He makes it to Jupiter and there, orbiting the massive gas giant, he encounters a third, gargantuan monolith which triggers the final leap. First, Bowman gets pulled into this surreal visual vortex known as the Stargate. Second, he embarks on an entirely mind-bending, almost hallucinatory trip through space and time. And finally, this intense journey deposits him into a completely sterile yet oddly neoclassical bedroom where he suddenly begins to rapidly age in a matter of moments.
Right there on his deathbed in this bizarre room, he has one final encounter with the monolith. As he reaches out to it, he's transformed. He is literally reborn as this luminous, embryonic being known as the Star Child. Floating out there in the vastness of space, the Star Child turns its gaze back upon Earth. It's a profound visual statement, suggesting that humanity, guided once again by the monolith, has crossed yet another threshold, reaching a completely new, transcendent phase of evolution.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. As we leave you with the enigmatic, glowing gaze of the Star Child looking down on our home planet, you kind of have to answer the film's ultimate question for yourself. Given our primal instincts and our incredible, sometimes terrifying technological advancements, are we ultimately doomed by our own tools, just like the crew of the Discovery were by Hal? Or are we, right at this very moment, standing on the threshold of our next great evolutionary leap? I'll let you chew on that one. Thanks for exploring this absolute masterpiece with me.